Hello, my name is Tracy Green. What is photography? Do you have to be a professional to be able to take good photos? How do you take good photos? No, you do not have to be a professional. But what you do need to know, you need to have a knowledge of the exposure triangle, the three basics of photography that will improve your pictures. How, you say? Let me explain. In order to have good photos, it is a good idea to have an interchangeable lens camera where you're able to change the lens and also change the setting. So I would like to introduce to you my camera and also explain to you the elements of exposure, which is also called the exposure triangle. Now, the exposure triangle can seem a little bit intimidating at first, but it simply refers to the most important elements of exposure, which is ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. You would need to know how to balance all of these three together in order to have sharp and well-lit photos. ISO controls the camera's sensitivity to light. A low setting will capture less light, and a higher setting will bring in more light. But understand, the quality of the image will decrease as the ISO increases, and you may see grain in your photos. An ideal setting of 100 to 200 when shooting outside will usually be a better choice. But in low light, when inside or at night, up the ISO to at least 400 to 800. Play with the ISO settings when you're taking pictures in each number, and that way you can able to compare them to one another to help you understand how to use this here setting. Shutter speed. Now this setting is for controlling the exposure of how long the shutter stays open when you take a picture. The longer the shutter stays open, the more light comes through the camera sensor. A fast shutter speed will freeze action, while a slower shutter speed will blur action. This control is measured in fractions. The setting for this control may go as slow as 30 seconds, which keeps the shutter open 30 seconds before it shuts. You could set it as fast as 1/4000th of a second. This speed is usually intended for landscaping and for sporting events to capture moving objects. Know the ISO and shutter speed are not enough to get sharp pictures now. There is still one more. And that brings us to our final setting of taking good pictures. And that is called aperture. That is called aperture. Aperture is the opening to control how much light actually comes into your camera lens. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a little hole there in my camera lens, and that's what's used to measure the aperture. And also it measures not only the aperture, but also it measures the depth of field. The depth of field is the area of the image that will remain sharp. The F numbers are also known as f-stops. They are a way of describing the size of the aperture and how open or closed the aperture is. A wider aperture or a low F number will allow more light to come through, but will create a narrow depth of field. It will create a narrow depth of field. While a narrow depth of field will create, which is a higher F number, will let less light come through. And this will allow a wider depth of field, as you can see right down at this here shot right here. A wider aperture will also isolate your subject, but but if you want to take a full scene where it's like a group, then you will probably need to use a lower aperture. So basically what I'm trying to say is that in order to get good photos, you need to learn how to balance the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed. And that will help you to take professional pictures, or for your pictures to look like they are professional. So these settings or the magic and resulting to quality images. Thank you.